Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our webinar, Leadership Succession and Planning with Nanette Fridman from Effect Collective. We're so happy to have her back. Before we get started, I just want to give a big thanks to our sponsors for our nonprofit series underwriters, Eastern Bank and Grassi, and our series supporter, InSource Services, for helping making programs like this happen. So we're so glad to have those sponsors. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Nanette, we're so happy to have you back. You always come with great information. So I'll pass it over to you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the sponsors and thanks to Charles River Chamber. I saw Greg on here. Thanks, Greg, and your fabulous team. This is such an important topic. And I was saying before we got on today that I have never had such requests for this topic. And I don't know whether there was because a lot of deferred maintenance from we're still in this kind of post-COVID period, or this is a baby boomer thing, or why, but this topic has been hot, hot, hot. And so we know that we always want to bring you through the chamber. The chamber is always on point. So we want to make sure this is on point as well. I'm going to share my deck with you. And then we're going to send this out afterwards because there's no reason for you to have to take notes while you should be eating lunch. Feel free to eat lunch. You can even keep your camera on if you want. We're among friends here. I do see David just took a drink. Excellent. I do see a lot of friends on this call, both from the area, all over Massachusetts, and even beyond. Maybe St. Louis is the furthest. So thank you all for joining. Whether you're a friend of the chamber or came through seeing it on my social media, I think this is great. And I see that people are still trying to join. So let me start and say really importantly that that's me, that we're going to discuss the imperative, and I really mean that word, imperative, of CEO emergency succession planning, whether it's a CEO, an executive director, whether it's a head of school, whatever that person is, the head of your camp, whatever, you need to have an emergency succession plan. And we're going to talk about what that is and how you do that. We're going to talk about planful succession planning for your CEO or your ED or your head of school or your head of camp. And we're going to understand the ideal board succession process and who owns this work. We are going to do this in less than an hour. So I'm going to take my last breath. I'm going to breathe deep and I'm going to go fast. No, but I will leave time for questions for sure. You are going to have this. We're going to touch on these three things because they're all so important. But please know that if you have questions that we don't get to answer, my contact information is in here and I'm willing to do a consult with any of you afterwards. So if your question doesn't get answered or whatever, we'll talk about it. This is really important. And I just want to say, like, to underscore that, this topic is the third leg of the stool. The other two legs are strategy and fundraising. So when I look at a nonprofit and I say, is this in good shape? These are the three things that I look at, and the rest to me is details. Okay, so let's go along together. And in the chat, how many of you already have an emergency succession plan? Just write Y or N, yes or no. Do you have one, yes or no? In the chat, just let me know. I want to see how many of you have an emergency succession plan. Most of you are saying no, which hence is why you're here today. Okay. All right. Wait, Greg, did you just put no? Oh, now I know why you're here today. Okay, good. All right. Well, we're going to change all that today. My second question, how many of you have begun planful succession planning for your CEO or ED? Yes? Yes, some of you. Oh, good. More answers. No, no, no. Okay. A few more yeses in here. I like it. A few more yeses in here. Recently, Stephen, great. Sort of. I don't know what sort of means, but okay. We just want to make sure everyone know where you're starting from. And finally, who here knows who your next board chair will be? Do you know who your next board chair will be? Yes or no? Okay, more yeses in here, but really mixed. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Okay, so this is really typical. Really typical of what we're seeing is that the most important thing that you need to have on here is an emergency succession plan, and the fewest people have it, which I don't understand. So we'll fix that. Some people have begun planful succession planning for the CEO, and usually that is depending on where they are at age stage. And then board succession is a mixed bag. So this is pretty typical. What exactly is succession planning, since I've said it 30 times and we've been on the phone for a minute? Succession planning is a strategy for passing on leadership roles within an organization. Why, it ensures continuity, and the organization is resilient. It mitigates risk associated with unexpected leadership vacancies, preserves organizational knowledge and provides stability. It gives donors, volunteers, and staff confidence. And there is this distinction between emergency and plan, which we'll go into. Okay, so succession planning is really a strategy for passing on the leadership role that is really important for these reasons. Let's dig in to emergency succession planning. Okay, this is for your professional, your highest professional. You may have it for other professionals that are key, but just to be clear, this is a reactive plan implemented when a CEO or executive director leaves abruptly due to unforeseen circumstances such as illness, death, or imminent termination. Okay, it's activated immediately. The reason that you write it down in advance is that when those things happen, illness, death, or immediate termination, you want to know immediately who's taking over. We don't want leadership vacuums, even for a day, right? These have been activated for things such as someone having surgery or someone having to take Family Medical Leave Act as well. But it's immediately activated to ensure critical operations continue without disruption. And the plans themselves can focus on both immediate and longer-term contingency strategies. It's important for you. We used to call this being when you get hit by the bus. I don't really like that. I don't want anyone to get hit by a bus, but that is kind of what you will often hear this referred to as the hit by the bus scenario. Okay. Who is responsible for this? The board of directors. The board of directors. They will work with the current executive, but usually a subset of the board, such as the executive committee or a succession planning task force. If you've learned with me before, you'll know the word committee is really not in vogue. So we like task forces, working groups. If you want to call it committee, fine. Often paired with a senior staff, will be tasked with executing the plan. The focus is on identifying an internal or external interim leader who can take care of the CEO's responsibilities. It doesn't mean that you're picking the person that will forever succeed them. It means that in the immediate that they can't show up for work, that you know who is going to take over. Now, importantly, this could be more than one person. We have seen scenarios where there are co-interims. If you have a large organization, I think Andrea might be working on her treadmill, which is good for you if you are, which is large organizations with big operations. Sometimes we will see co. That's fine. Otherwise, though, we don't want to see too many people because people need to know who's in charge and then they can delegate different parts of the work. So it's very important that the central question be answered. If the CEO or the ED isn't there, who is in charge in the interim? Okay. It's going to outline the process for what is going to happen immediately to make sure the critical roles are covered. Who has decision-making authority? What are the communication plans? Who gets told of this in your different key stakeholders, whether it's a membership organization or donor community or community partners? That will be included. In addition, when we do our emergency succession plan, we're going to make sure that the current CEO and whoever has this information fills out key contact information. What are the key financials? What are the key building information if you have a building? What is the key employment information? Where are the key contracts held? Where are the insurance policies? And on and on. So if you think about your own personal lives, and I don't want to cause anyone here stress, but I hope you have this done on the personal front. This is like that kit that they want to sell me when I turn 50 on Instagram, to tell me to get my end of life things in order. I was like really offended by that on my 50th birthday when I got that in my AARP card, but we'll talk about that another day. But this is really making sure that all that information is in one place, or it's left clearly where it is. So all of that is going to get literally put together here. Emergency succession plan, who takes over, who do we tell, and what is the key information that they need. Okay. It also will address how staff, stakeholders, and external partners, like I said, will be informed of the leadership change. Some will be called. There might be an email draft that's included, or a press release draft that's included if you really want to think ahead. But at the minimum, you want to make sure you name who is going to take over internally to make sure that there is a continuation. Now, this plan gets passed by the board, and it stays in effect as long as the plan says it does by the board. So a typical plan will say, this is going to be in effect for 30 days, and the board has the right to extend it by vote or not. Or it might say it's going to be in effect for 90 days unless the board decides otherwise, right? So you can do it either way. The bottom line is, though, that in the middle of this, you want to know who is the immediate person that's in charge. And then you want to give the board some control of being able to make the next move shortly thereafter, whether that's 30, 60, or 90 days later. Okay? So this is important information. If your organization does not have an emergency succession plan, bring it to the board, figure out who's going to work on it, and let your CEO or executive director know that this is part of their next year goals. Their 2024 goals, or their next year goals, if you've already done these, includes making sure that this is figured out. Because sometimes you've got to figure out who's the person in a small organization. Is it going to be your lead fundraiser? Is it going to be your lead program person? Maybe it needs to be co. And if you have a large organization, you have to also figure out, is it your assistant director? Is it your associate? Are there multiple vice presidents and you're not sure? So there's work on the professional side to give input and think about the key contact information and the communication plans. And there's work on the board side, because ultimately this gets passed by the board of directors. So when we come back together 12 months from now, everyone on this call, no excuses, everyone needs an emergency succession plan. It is not hard. You can find copies online. You can ask me for copies. You can get copies from any consultant. This is not hard. You have to do this, no excuses. Your organizational reputation, and for your donors and for your staff, this is a must do. Okay? Everyone give me a yep, I'm going to do this, Nanette. This is what my family does. They're like, yep, we're going to do it. Especially my 17-year-old. Okay. Now, let's switch and talk about planful succession planning. Again, staying on the CEO. Okay? We're on the CEO. This is a proactive strategy designed to identify, and here's the key word, develop successors for the CEO position, typically over a longer time frame. The purpose is to cultivate leadership internally and ensure a smooth transition when a CEO's departure is anticipated. So if you're a CEO or executive director or whatever just started, you're not going to be thinking about this. But if they've been there for 20 years, 30 years, I hope you're thinking about this. Or if there's someone in a highly, that they're being recruited, they've thought about leaving twice before, I hope you're, having honest conversations about this. Not to scare you, but 78% of nonprofits don't have a formal succession plan, even though 2/3 of leaders plan to leave within the next 5 years. So just let that sink in. We're not talking about the elephant in the room, okay? I like to talk about everything, especially elephants. And I really think that this is a conversation when you do your CEO yearly review, which please tell me you're doing, and you're talking about their goals, and you're doing their evaluation and their assessment and their compensation. I hope that there's regular, honest conversations about this, especially if they are 20, 30 years in, especially if you know that they've been heavily recruited. Where do they see themselves? Because if they care about the organization, they're going to want to help you figure this out. Okay. Ideally, we want to begin 2 to 5 years before an anticipated leadership change. When they're approaching retirement, end of a contract, or during strategic planning cycles, these usually come up. We want to do that, like I said, regular review to ensure the plan remains relevant and updated with organizational changes. You may have added into your org chart and hired an assistant director, a vice president, an associate director, and maybe you were grooming them to take over, but guess what? They decided they left. So now you got to go back to the drawing board, right? So this is a dynamic process that we keep looking at. Who's involved? The current CEO plays a role in grooming potential successors and providing input. The board oversees the process and ensures the plan aligns with the organization's strategic goals. And the staff and stakeholders may be involved through surveys or meetings to understand the qualities decided in the next leader. You may have a leader in place that has done wonderful things for you, but the organization may have grown or changed or wanting to grow or change in a way that would require a different leader. And this is really an opportunity in planful succession to get a head start at figuring that out. Who's going to come next? Now, not every organization is going to hire someone new. Sometimes you're going to groom internal people, but you're not going to have the resources to groom someone new, to hire someone new. That's okay. Or maybe it isn't anyone internal at all, and you don't have the money, but at least you're starting to think about what that job description might look like, what the timing is, who might lead the charge. Okay, so this is all super duper important. Again, signals to donors, continuity for users and members, keeps the staff aligned. People don't like leadership vacuums, right? People like continuity of leadership. And so this is part of that. What would happen and how you would have detailed steps, identifying potential successors, developing their skills, and creating a transition timeline. In the case of retirement, if someone says, I'm retiring at the end of this contract, that is an ideal situation. The contract's 3 years or 5 years, you know how long you have, everyone knows what to anticipate, right? And we can do a nice fundraising campaign around the person too, which always makes me extra happy. There are lots of methods for preparing potential successors: mentors, training, leadership development opportunities, coaching, certificates, continuing education. And there are lots of strategies for gradually transferring responsibilities. So if someone knows they're retiring and we know who the successor is going to be, we want to start putting that person, as we inch closer, up front, making sure they're introduced to the donors and the stakeholders, making sure they take more internal responsibility, right? And that's really a delicate balance. And that would be a gradual process, but very, very important, right? So there's lots of strategy here. And this is another piece of work, both for the CEO and for the board, to really have an eye on. Best practice: you engage board members, staff, and external advisors in the planning process. We want to balance the need for confidentiality with the need for transparency in the organization. And there are regular updates to the plan. Like I said, you hired the assistant or associate, they didn't work out. You thought you were going to promote someone internal, but something happens in their own trajectory that doesn't make them seem like a good choice, or you're going in a different direction organizationally. Things happen. This plan will change over time, especially if you get a real head start, like 5 years out. Often we won't talk about it publicly that far out, but there'll be a small group working on it, and it will become public closer to the date. We don't want to cause a lot of time for people to kind of, the peanut gallery, members to get nervous, donors to get nervous, end users to get nervous. So we wouldn't say in 5 years so-and-so is retiring necessarily, and we're starting this succession planning. We would start that almost like the quiet phase of a capital campaign or an endowment campaign. We do a lot of work quietly, and then when we're ready, we'll kind of announce it closer to. But I think that this is really important work. And honestly, the most important thing the board does is hire, evaluate, support the executive. That is the most important thing that the board does. And this is part of it. Okay, succession planning. Pitfalls: lack of planning, poor communication, and inadequate candidate preparation. All of these can be avoided if we talk about it in a way that is transparent, at least for our small group. We come up with a project plan. This is another strategic piece of work that needs to be done. And we invest in candidate preparation. So it affects the budget. Sometimes that means we're hiring. Sometimes that means we're sending people to conferences, getting them coaches, getting them certificates, bringing in other people to teach them. Whatever it is, that's also the reason that we want to plan for it, is because there are costs sometimes associated. Okay. So definitely pitfalls to be avoided, but this can be a wonderful, wonderful exercise for the organization. And it can be really an opportunity for the board and the CEO to ensure both of their legacies. Can you imagine working somewhere 20 or 30 years and no one ever talking to you about what's going to happen afterwards? Right? Or working somewhere and knowing that this is your last contract and constantly being like, I don't know what's going to be. I don't know what's going to be. You want to have a say in it. It's your legacy, right? Both on the board side and on the organization side. So talk about it. And if you need outside help, this is certainly an area that we often help with. Okay. Finally, before we open it up to your questions, I want to talk about board chair succession planning. So far, we talked about emergency planning and planned professional planning. We're only going to talk about planned board chair succession planning because most of your bylaws already say what happens in the event that a board chair or board president can't serve. Most of them will say that the vice president or the vice chair fills their role, or they'll tell you how that's filled. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that it might not be good to have a contact list to make sure that everyone has all the information, but usually that's already spelled out. So we're just talking about planful board chair succession planning. Okay. This is the process of identifying, preparing new leaders to take over as board chair when the current chair steps down. It ensures the continuity of effective governance and leadership at the board level. I should also note that treasurers often require succession planning too, because that is a very unique set of skills. And we often will want to plan for that in addition, right? In terms of bringing people onto the board who could fill that role and learn from the current treasurer in time. Okay. This is really important. I'm curious, for those of you on the call, how far in advance do you start discussing your next board chair? Just put into the chat A, B, C, D, or E. More than 3 years in advance for those of you that might have first vice presidents, second vice presidents, or first chairs, second chairs. 2 to 3 years in advance, 1 to 2 years in advance, 6 months to 1 year in advance, or less than 6 months. Oh, wow. Okay. So most of you are saying 6 months to a year on here. Some of you spread between B and C, but most of you 6 months to a year in advance. So one thing I would say about this is that haven't done it yet, past times or in reaction to vacancy. Robert, not after this session, no more past times in response to vacancy. We're gonna have this all thought about. I'm a tough grader. I need this to be an A+. Okay. You see this guy in the cartoon, for those of you that can see your screen, he's holding a guy in a neck hold, and he's saying, yes, hello, JG, I found a volunteer who's willing to head up the fund drives, right? We don't want to have to do this and kind of like beg people to take positions on our board, because that's not good governance. We want to do this in a planful, thoughtful way where people are excited about and have time to prepare for and be brought on and have a proper baton handed to them on the governance side of the house. So When to begin succession planning is typically linked to the chair's term limits or part of the board's regular strategic planning process. So for example, if you know that your board chair can only serve 1 2-year term or 2 1-year terms or 1 3-year term or whatever it is, you would start planning appropriately. And if you have built into your structure that you have a named first vice president, second vice president, and the first vice president is going to become the next president, and then the second vice president, that's something. Or sometimes these days, what I see more common is that you will have 2 vice presidents, but you won't know which one is going to go next because they might not be ready to commit to it that far out. The bottom line is that succession planning should start early. And here you go. Governance committees or nominating committees should put it on the agenda for every quarter. You want to be thinking about new board members year round. You want to be putting people on the board who could be potential chairs. You want to be thinking about the treasurer and the other key positions, if it's development chair or whatever the key positions are. You want to be thinking about succession planning and where those holes are, and then feeding people onto the board so they can grow and fill those holes. And there should be regular conversations quarterly about this work, whether it's putting people on the board or who you might have had conversations with about their interest in serving in an officer or an important committee chair capacity. Okay. Who is accountable for succession planning? Ultimately, this is really important. The entire board is responsible for having a competent board and a viable board in place. We tend to delegate that responsibility to a governance and nominating committee or leadership development committee. But my hope is that everyone is involved with succession planning, right? Because I think you need all hands on deck to really think about who you need, what the characteristics and attributes and skills, because your current board chair might have been great for this period in time. You've adopted a new strategic plan. You have a new capital campaign. You have something new programmatically coming. Now you need someone with a slightly different skill set to take you to the next place. So we all have to be thinking about what's that profile and how are we going to either look at the existing board and bring someone along or add people to the board in time to bring them up. Okay, so everyone should be involved. Like I said, the governance and nominating committee is leading this. The full board is involved in approving the process, the criteria, agreeing that, yeah, this is what we need in our next leader. And ultimately, in most of your cases from your bylaws, we'll be voting on the new chair. Perhaps it is a membership organization. Ultimately, they may as well. It's important that the outgoing chair provide guidance and insights into the role for a smoother transition. So we don't want your board chair just to take off. We want to make sure that the board chair can, once the person is identified, they're slowly having them sit at the head of the table. Hopefully they've been on the executive committee or they're brought onto the executive committee. They're meeting regularly with the chair and the executive as they get closer to. We're bringing them into that inner sanctum so they're learning the job well in advance, okay? We want to review the responsibilities of the chair with them, think about characteristics of effective chairs, determine the criteria. I suggest a database of prospects because you may have to ask a few people to get someone, and someone might tell you not now, but maybe next time. Well, we want to keep that information somewhere. I also love self-evaluations for board members to surface people who are sometimes the quieter, less known potential leaders. Do you see yourself taking a leadership role in the organization? We've gotten self-evaluations back from board members with people who never spoke at a board meeting. So it was quite a surprise to have them self-identify and then to bring them in and along in leadership. You want to have informal conversations. Can you see yourself as chair? Are you interested in serving as chair? Want to think about asking past board and committee members and looking broadly at committees, donors, staff, and community partners for recommendations. People who have worked with people on committees who aren't board members, if they tell you this person's fabulous, let's get that person on the board and then let's bring that person through the board into an officer position. Maybe they're secretary or vice president or chair of a committee. And then let's see, are they material to be a board chair or board president? But all this takes time. So we can't find out at the last minute, oh, we have no one to come next. And you haven't given me time to bring people from committees to board, bring people from board to officer and executive committee. So now I'm just grabbing someone. And no one wants to be grabbed, and no one wants to feel like this wasn't a thoughtful process for the organization. So the reason why we start early with this is that there is some subset who should own this and be laying awake at night thinking about this. When I became board chair of an organization, the first thing I did after I wrote my opening remarks for the accepting it was start to think about who was going to come after me. Right? And it's not because I wanted to get rid of the position, but it's because I believe that's also fundamental to being in leadership, is making sure that we're bringing other people along. Okay. So these steps are very familiar. If you know your development steps, we identify, we cultivate, we recruit, we train, we steward, and we retain good volunteer leaders. If we do this, we will have a big pool for potential board chairs, right? In the old days, when I first started doing this work, people used to say everyone on the board should be a potential board member, a potential board chair. And I would say, I don't think so, because not everyone wants to be a potential board chair or board president, and not everyone has the skill set to be a potential board chair or board president. But I think what is true is that we do want people with leadership potential identified and cultivated and recruited for the board. Or we want people who love the mission, who join the board, that then we can train and fill in some of the leadership gaps, perhaps, to make them into a potential good board president or board chair. It takes time. Okay. This is a big piece of strategic work. 1 to 2 years in residency is ideal. The designee is in the loop. They're coached by organizational leaders. They might be mentored by outgoing chair and past leaders. And sometimes none of this will happen because you kind of grab the person 4 months in advance. And then we'll do what's called a boot camp handoff, where we'll put together all the things that the new board chair needs to know. And we'll do like a download. We'll make, in the old days, we'd make binders. Now we'll probably make digital folders. And we would have a boot camp handoff, almost like a retreat with all the players. But boot camp handoffs are my least favorite. I really want someone who can sit at the table or sit on the Zoom and really assumes kind of some responsibility early on and gradually, so they're not overwhelmed and we're not dropping any balls. But if we have to, that's what we do. I also want to just say, be mindful of the transition. We want to celebrate past success while looking to the future. The former chair wants to let go but remain engaged, and you should think about how. You want to articulate their desired future involvement and find them a role. And remember that the incoming chair, unlike the paid executives, okay, we need to remind them that they have to become motivator in chief. They have to make contact with each board or committee member. And you want to introduce him or herself to the community and share their vision and goals for their term. So these are all important pieces to remember, that this is a transition and this is something that people have been volunteers for and are going to volunteer to do. So it's not saying that we just put them in the position to say good luck. We have to kind of be constantly coaching and advising. If you're having trouble with board succession, you want to make sure that you're prioritizing the position and that you're open to different type of leaders. Just because you had a board chair with certain skills or background doesn't mean you always have to. Sometimes we have to look for an experienced outsider or a more inexperienced insider, right? We're not always going to have someone on the board who's been up through the ranks, served, been secretary, been treasurer, been vice president, and now is ready to be board chair or board president. We're going to have to sometimes take someone with less experience, and that's okay. Make sure you have job descriptions and that roles might have to be redefined or renegotiated. Not every board chair does the same thing. If you had someone who was retired or didn't work outside the house as your board chair, you can't expect the next person, if they have a full-time job, is going to do the same things. And that's often a reason that organizations struggle. You've had these superhero board chairs, and someone's like, I can't do what they did. Well, they don't have to, right? You get to redefine the job when you become, or you say yes to the position before you say yes. You also want to sell the team around them. And if all else fails, you can always consider co-chairs or co-presidents and make sure the right person asks. Because one thing I've learned is who asked someone to be on the board, who asked someone to be on the executive committee, who asked someone to be the board chair. David Sellers is telling me yes, so I know it's true. Matters a lot. It's who asked. You don't want someone asked if it's not a warm relationship, if you don't have to. We need you. You are uniquely qualified for this moment in time. Write that down. We need you. You are uniquely qualified to be our board chair for this moment in time because of your experience with advocacy and our new strategic plan, because of your experience with capital campaigns and our new capital campaign, because of your experience working on the programmatic side and our plans to expand programs. Because why? Because of your skill set as a lawyer, as a marketer, as a fundraiser, as a dedicated volunteer who knows the organization inside and out, as someone with an HR background and we're onboarding a new CEO. Doesn't matter why, there has to be a reason they're the right person at the right time. And please, whatever you do, don't beg. We've already asked 3 people, they all said no. That is terrible. Who would take that job? No, never. It really has to be positioned as an honor. It is a privilege to serve your mission, and you're selling the organization, the professional team, the rest of the board. And if you're having not lots of no's, you got to ask yourself why. Why are you having lots of no's? Why? Is it because they think that there isn't enough professional support? Is it because they're not sure about the strategic plan? Is it because they don't want to fundraise? Is it because, why are they saying no? Then you can problem solve it. But if you don't know why people are saying no, you're not going to get to solve the problem and get yourself the right chair. I mean, can you believe it's only 12:37 and I left us so much time for questions? I mean, I'm kind of excited about that. Okay, so just to summarize, when we talk about emergency executive succession planning, no excuse, you all need it. Very few of you said you have it. You are going to engage someone on the board to take the lead, whether it's the executive committee or a task force, and you're going to engage your current CEO or executive to be partners with them to think through who it should be and to put the document together, and then your board's going to vote on it, and you're going to gather up all the contact information. No excuses. Doctor, no notes from the doctor, okay? Or the teacher, no dogs eating that homework. Planful executive succession planning depends on where your executive's at, right? Are they end of contract? Do you want them to stay? Do they want to stay? Are they close to retirement? There's all sorts of factors in there. Board leader succession planning, if you told me that you don't have it figured out more than a year in advance, then you have opportunity to optimize, because it really behooves you to let someone go through a whole board calendar year knowing that they're going to sit there next. I want to go through a whole board year. It's very different when I know next year I'm in charge of the budget, overseeing the budget process vote. Next year, I'm in charge of the fundraising reporting and fundraising plan. Next year, I'm going to do the CEO's evaluation. Next year, I'm going to have to move the nominating committee's reports. If I know that, I'm sitting watching this year very differently. If I don't know that, and I haven't been a board chair or board president somewhere else, it's going to kind of be like, okay, of course I can figure it out. You're going to pick a smart person, but why wouldn't you give them the gift of having a year notice? So if you don't give at least a year, my strong recommendation is to make that happen. Okay, now, questions, comments, thoughts, concerns. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What more do we need to add? What have you done that everyone on this call can learn from? We've got 80 people here that want to learn from you. So what tips or tricks might you add? What questions? I don't know if you can unmute yourself, but you certainly can put it in the chat. Any considerations when CEO is the founder? Great question, Bruce. So founder conversations are much more delicate. Cheryl, I see your hand. We'll come to you next. Founder conversations are much more delicate. Those conversations, again, are really about where the founder sees themselves and where the organization sees itself and the role of the founder. So sometimes if there's alignment around those, then we're just doing exactly what I said. Sometimes there's not alignment around those, and then we have a more delicate conversation about, listen, we could not have done this without you. We're now in the next phase. We want to make a plan for how you're going to stay involved, maybe join the board, maybe, still play a role, but we need you to help us think about the leader that's going to take us to the next phase and make a plan for that. But very different when the CEO is the founder, because it's a much more delicate conversation. Okay, my friend Cheryl, can you unmute? Oh, great.
I can. Hi. Thank you so much. I have two questions. This is amazing and fascinating, and I feel like I want to run back and do all this work now. First is with succession planning for a CEO. You talked a lot about the need to invest in staff in an organization, which I both love. And I think in this moment, when I've been thinking so much about diversity, equity, inclusion, how to create a pool that might not always be the pool that has always stepped into leadership. I'm curious about how you think about that in terms of succession planning, sort of internal, external. Should I ask both questions or should I just wait?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, my second question is totally different, so I'm going to ask both.
Please.
You talked about models of board people knowing for a year that they're going to step into board leadership. I'm curious maybe about a technical fix to something that I've been thinking about. Our board has to elect the next chair. I'm curious how or when to technically make that work in a way that someone knows they're stepping in, so that we can sort of fix that in advance. Those are my two questions.
Okay, so let me answer the last question first, which is some bylaws do that by saying this board should have a chair and two vice chairs, one of the next, and sometimes we say first vice chair, second vice chair, or sometimes we just say two chairs who are, assumed or determined to be the next leadership when nominated by the nominating committee, right? And approved by the board. So the way that you would know is that if I'm sitting as vice chair and I say, oh, this isn't a good year for me to do it, why don't you do it? Or I say, actually, I'm glad I didn't agree because we're moving, right? Like, so that becomes, but I've been in the mindset that at some point I'm gonna do it when I know I'm in that vice chair seat. So a lot of places have those vice chairs with whether it's explicit or not, that they say, that is the pool that we're making for people to go up, whether it's, again, it could be in the bylaws, the first chair becomes the next, chair, or it could not be, and it's just something that is understood culturally in the organization. Now, that doesn't always work, even when you put it in the bylaws or you assume it. The second piece of that is that my hope is that even if you're not doing that, that you have been grooming someone and that you have a good enough read that they're going to be voted on by the board, that it is pretty clear that you don't have a contentious vote and that they're going to be approved. And so you almost are just like assuming that they are. But some organizations do have a chair-elect or chair in waiting. So you could even have another layer here where you could say, we have vice chairs or presidents, we have a chair-elect or chair in waiting, a president-elect, and then we have a current president or chair, and then it's already named. So that chair-elect or president-elect, we already know that they're coming next. And sometimes that happens a full term ahead, and sometimes that comes at the half-term mark. So those are structural fixes. Let me answer the other question about DEI and whatnot. Really important point. So two things on that. I think that inviting people into leadership for succession planning is an important conversation, who have not traditionally been in leadership. And this is why we want to do broad searches with defined criteria, one of which may be thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So when we think about the criteria that we're thinking about, it doesn't just mean what their skill set is. There are other criteria for us to keep in mind. And certainly when we think about whether it's hiring or promoting or training, this should be absolutely a factor. And it is in almost every organization today that I'm working with. Meredith asked, do most executives have a contract? Good question. It depends on the size of the organization. It depends on the formality of the organization. And it depends on whether they're anxious to lock that person down in a more formal way, whether they've asked for it, and how it all began. So I would say that at a certain level, most people do want a contract because they don't want to be at-will employees. They want more spelled out of what they're kind of entitled to in terms of their term and their salary in advance and bonuses and benefits and all those type of things. And they want some guarantees, right? Now, of course, every contract has a way for both parties to get out, right? Whether it's for cause or without cause. But I do see at larger organizations or organizations with more senior, most of them do have contracts. Robert, challenge will be to establish succession planning as a key priority that must not get shoved aside. Easy to kick it down the road since we'll be invincible and we'll never have unforeseen. So the reason this came up, I will tell you that I did more emergency succession plans at the beginning of COVID than I had ever done in my entire 25 years at the time doing this, because people didn't know what to expect with COVID. Was someone going to get COVID and unfortunately die or not be able to come in? So we did a ton of these early days of COVID. Boards were like scrambling to do this, okay? What happened is that since then, or if they didn't do it then, people have gotten like laissez-faire again about it. And until an organization that didn't have one and had to scramble, you don't really feel that pain. But it's really unfair to the staff. It's really unfair to the board. It's really unfair to the organization. It's not hard to do this. Like, you can do an emergency succession plan. It should take you 4 months tops, if that. Okay. Charlotte, I had an emergency webinar successor today since chair of board couldn't make it. Can I ensure that we will get the recording in deck? Because you said it's a most excellent and informed presentation, yes. Without that, Charlotte, I wasn't sure. Okay. Andrea, I should tell you, I really wanted to be a stand-up comedian, but my mother made me go to law school, and then I did this after law school. So just know that all the smiles and the laughs and the little things, I really appreciate them, because I'm basically a frustrated comedian at heart. Andrea, what are some tips for doing executive succession plannings in small organizations with tiny staffs? Great question. In most small organizations, you will not have necessarily an internal person to name, but you may have a plan for bringing the interim person in, whether it's, we've already vetted these interim staffing organizations and they're on standby. They know us, we've had a conversation with them. And I've had that happen. It may be that we're going to do a very short emergency succession plan period of 30 days, but even though the lead fundraiser or the lead programming person or the lead, whoever the other person is, doesn't want to do it beyond that, they'll hold the fort while the board can get collected. So often when there's a tiny staff, if there is someone else, they may not serve for much longer than it takes the board to get oriented, right? But so that's one thing. And or part of the emergency succession planning is, how are you going to identify the interim, whether it's a staffing agency or interim, search firm, or whether it's, putting together the job description and having that ready to go. There are ways that you can do it. I think one of the things I would just say in general is that it's very hard to give a talk for organizations that have one staff. I know some of you on this call, you are the organization, there's one of you, and some of you on this call have huge staffs, right? Okay, nope, we're ahead of schedule. Hold on. Okay, good. And so I understand that this is a difficult thing for that reason. It doesn't any less mean that you need an emergency succession plan. You all do. It just means what's in there. All the contact information should still be in there. In some cases, the board chair becomes the interim executive if it's a really small organization. And I've seen that happen where they're just holding down the fort until this can get figured out. But that wouldn't be my preference. But it depends on where you're at. Okay. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Oh, hi, Anne. Our challenge is a very small staff and a tiny budget. Will donors give funds to help create a successor plan? So I hope donors don't love funding these type of very sexy projects necessarily, but if they really care about your work and you and your legacy, and they believe in what you're doing, then hopefully you can get funds for a consultant to help you do this. I do have to say, although I fancy myself indispensable, you can find a lot of information online about this. I mean, I don't want to tell you not to get money to do this, but you can do this. I mean, especially Anne, I know you yourself, you're very bright. You can do this. But if you can raise funds, definitely do. I will also say, I see this as a strategic imperative. Like, I cannot think of something more important than this to kind of let everyone sleep at night. But like, I don't sleep at night anyway, so whatever. But like, if you did do this, theoretically, you might sleep better because all that key information and going through the thought processes really does take you to that next place. Thanks, Emily. All right, one more question, last question. I'm gonna put I just want to let you know, thank you for everyone that's private message. A couple of people are asking. I'm going to put my information. I encourage you. So a couple things. I try to share a lot of useful information, both on LinkedIn, Nanette Fridman, no Ian Friedman, just to keep it fun, or on our Facebook page, Effect Collective. So I would encourage you, if you want to connect on LinkedIn or you want to go to our Facebook, we tend to share a lot of news you can use. So definitely do that. Also, if people do want to sign up for time, we do 15-minute consultations with anyone. As long as it's about a topic we can speak to. So if anyone does want to talk about your specifics, feel free to do that. Oh, Linda, thank you very much. Oh, Linda, hi, how are you? Lisa, what is optimal? An external interim CEO, a board member, or a staff person? I imagine it depends, but you just said board chair is not your preference. The reason why is it just is confusing. Like, they have a day job, or if they don't have a day job, they don't necessarily know what's been going on during the day, right? Maybe as much as a staff person does. So my board chair, that's asking someone to take on a role they weren't standing up to do, and it means they're doing two jobs. So that wouldn't be my preference for that reason. But for me, if there's a staff person internal, that is my first choice. If not, I would do an external interim. And if not, I would do the board chair, but that would be my last choice. Great. Oh, Meredith, terrific. Okay. Anybody else? All right, good. So we're going to get this sent out to you. You're going to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want. You're going to follow us on Facebook if you want. You're going to reach out to me if you want to set up a free consult. I'll send you my Calendly Fakakta thing where you go on there. Don't ask me how it works. I don't know. I still don't know how the fax machine works. So all this is like, wow. And then we'll go from there. But I'm really encouraged that so many of you showed up today. This is a great sign. And I do have a list of who was on here. So when I call you a year from now and say, did you do it? Don't be surprised. No, I'm just kidding. I won't call you. They don't give me your phone number. I won't call you. But I do want you to do it. And I want you to reach out if you need help, because we can help you do this. We do this all the time. But if you don't need us, even better, because spend your money on something else. All right. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks for the great work. Onward, onward, onward. Shout out to all my Nantucket friends who joined today. Biggest little island. Sandra, thank you so much. You make my day. We're glad it's fun. And really thanks so much to Charles River. You guys are a great partner. And the communities that you touch and beyond have a big reach. And we really appreciate so much being able to be on here and help strengthen the community with you, because that's what it's all about. We're really just about community, do better, doing good. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Invite me back. Think of a different topic.
Thank you.
Yeah, tell the folks
Thank
what you want to
you.
hear about, and we'll go from there.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day. Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Jab.